Nice.
All right.
Wow.
I think I'm set. And I got the book on my iPad.
Wow.
Did my notes carry over?
I sure hope so.
I sure. Yep, they did.
Nice. Wow.
All right. So how far through the book did you get?
Well, I read the what we wanted, but I also read this situation. I really like this, actually. Yeah.
Yeah. I read the situation in the first 3 sections.
Yeah. I thought we were going to do the first 4, but we don't have to do that. I mean, it doesn't matter.
It's fine. I mean, I just started.
Yeah,
it
I know. Yeah, that was I called an audible. I realized I have a dentist appointment tomorrow, and my mouth is going to be numb.
I mean, that'd be kind of funny.
It would be. It would be.
You'd be like, that's a good point. I'd never thought of that.
Yeah. Yeah, no, but Rose Wilder Lane.
Yep. She's considered one of the 3 progenitors of libertarianism in the U.S.
Yeah, her and what, Ayn Rand?
Her, Ayn Rand, and I can never remember the third person. It's not somebody who I've read much. Thompson or something like that.
Yeah. No, I mean, obviously, I don't agree with everything, but she's a great writer. So you can tell her mom is one of the great American writers. It makes sense she is, and obviously she also did a lot of autobiography. I always say autobiography. She did like a lot of biographies before this, like of one of Ford, right, and stuff. So she obviously knows what she's doing. Much better writer, at least in terms of making it interesting, than James Burnham, of course. But yeah.
Yeah, I feel like she doesn't go too long on things.
Yes.
Like she moves pretty quickly through points.
Right. Well,
nice.
And there aren't as many. I mean, this is, I guess, to Burnham's credit, there aren't as many facts. It's more narrative-y, her writing, which I think is why it's so much sort of.
Well, I guess she's more laying out her own philosophy rather than laying somebody else's out.
Exactly.
Which is kind of a different project.
Right. And she's got a lot of interesting sort of stories in there too, which I think helps sort of make it interesting. Like I guess you didn't get, well, you've read the book before though, but I don't know if you remember, but in like the planned economies part, she's telling all these funny stories about living in France and how, basically you can't get anything done and everything sucks.
It just sucks.
Yeah. No, and I think this is a good one to read after the anarchy. Oh, well, you know what I mean. Like, sort of as to complement all the anarchy stuff that we've been talking about and the organization stuff we've been talking about. But yeah.
Right. Well, I think she would be considered an anarchist for sure.
Interesting. I could see that. She certainly makes a point about that at one time.
I mean, she's starkly anti-democracy.
Yeah. Well, she hasn't come off that stark yet, but I could see that from what you've told me.
Because I think from her perspective, it's another version of communism.
Yeah, she comes off starkly against everything, which I guess is your point, why she's an anarchist. Yeah, because, I mean, she goes through kind of talk. Well, I don't know. Should we summarize?
Sure.
Do you want to summarize? I don't know.
Do you have a good one?
Well, she's talking about energy, I would say, is sort of fundamentally. So she starts off with the situation, and the situation basically, in my
from Jersey Shore
opinion, is the Jersey Shore. Yeah, exactly. He's got great abs. So, and I feel like her big conclusion, and this is sort of, you've actually said this in recent ones, is that consciousness is a leap of faith, and that the only control, basically, human energy is the thing that there's this great thing that we can control. And ultimately, the thing that actually controls our energy is our religious faith. And this, she's laying this down because then she goes in and starts talking about how governments have been tried to be creative to basically harness human energy, but in reality, nothing can control human energy but the individual.
Right.
And and it's really about sort of effectively what's she said, she posed it, I think, very well. We're saying might be in the old world part. But it's basically that, the big thing is how to harness collective human energy.
Right.
Yeah. Yes, here it is. So this is on page 8. The problem is real. It is the problem of controlling the combined energies of many individuals. And so this is basically what governments have been trying to solve. And I guess your point is, and your point about her point is that ultimately anarchy is probably the only way to do it, man.
And man.
Yeah. And you know what? I mean, this is the interesting thing. Out of all the anarchist writers that we've read, I feel the most compelled by this. I'll be honest.
Interesting.
Yes. I really liked.
That's great.
I really liked how she was like framing it from the cell perspective, because I was doing a lot of those things too. Of like, you know, she starts out talking about biology and stuff like that. Anyway, yeah.
I think that the energy point is interesting. I think even how she starts the entire frame, where the situation starts, I think is already a compelling way of approaching the problem, because she's starting from a physical situation, the idea of energy, and then the special case of human energy as distinct from non-living energy, and then also as distinct from individualistic energy, like when she's talking about bees, and presumably that would include all sorts of things like mushrooms and ants and things like that.
Right. And she's raising she's framing the question well, which is, I think, a question we've all been trying to figure out, is like, how basically why were humans living in squalor for basically, you know, hundreds of thousands of years, and then just in the span of 200 years, all of a sudden you had abundance of food and everything like that. What was it that caused that? And, you know, there's the guns. Well, no, the guns, germs, and steel is about, you know, the takeover. But generally, you know, there's obviously theories about it, about how the Industrial Revolution came about in England, which I think a lot of people frame it from a perspective of just England has always been resource poor, and so they just needed to figure out a way to use all their crappy iron, and then, you know, and stuff like that, among other, you know, things. But yeah, I mean, I still haven't, you know, seen a super compelling reason other than potentially, this, I would agree with her, is this, at some point, the individual was lifted up, and that seems to be one of the key things, which is, you know, obviously why, you know, I don't want to say I'm a libertarian, but, you know, it's I'm not a libertarian, dang it. but this is one of the things that I think makes it so appealing, because it does, you know, and maybe I am, I don't know, who knows. I like to play. I want to be coy about it. Because I just don't know enough about the you know, the ethos or whatever of you know.
Well, so I guess we didn't announce the book yet, right, on the show?
Oh no, we haven't.
we're reading The Discovery of Freedom by Rose Wilder.
Yes. Yeah, it's true. 1943.
Yep. Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, it's a crazy time to be writing, too.
Well, it's the same. It's about the same. There's another sort of reason it was a great book to choose after James Burnham, because James Burnham's was like around the same time. And I don't know if you had the same thing, but I still, and with her as well, when they say like Hitler is, I still am like, what? They're like talking about Hitler in the present, and I'm like, what are they talking? It's like, it's crazy. So
yeah. No, it is wild. The other thing about her that I feel like I appreciate is there's this type of person, there's not too many sheer dichotomies of one type of person and then another.
Well, there kind of is.
Yeah, I mean, a little bit.
There's a dichotomy of, and she puts, I would say, government into two groups of like all the governments that we've tried, and then I guess you would say anarchy, right?
Sure. It's true. But I feel like she puts a lot of things under the umbrella of communism that probably in general parlance today we wouldn't.
Yes, I would agree with that. Yeah. But
it's also interesting how that she talks about communism being essentially an ancient
this was something
way of organizing. That communism has two important truths that it sees.
Right.
But it has a fatal flaw, so to speak. but that it actually, in some ways, is good at addressing certain problems facing the survival of humanity.
Right. Yeah. I agree. She had a very interesting take on communism, and we had sort of talked about that idea that communism was like of an ancient way, and actually, I was making that point that it feels like Marxists are trying to go back to pre. Civilization,
pre-modern,
yeah, and I would argue in some, exactly, because that does seem to be how we started, and thus it makes sense that you would have communism come in full force at the sort of, I guess you could say, I don't know, it wasn't the zenith of capitalism in 1848, obviously, but that was definitely an inflection point. That you had sort of a lot of the first labor movements came about in that time. And, this is when Marx and Engels were really starting to work on their theories as a reaction to this new capitalist sort of modern economic policy. How fun. Wow, that was just a riveting sentence, wasn't it?
It was great. So what do you think about the energy conception, about starting from energy, because it feels sort of tied to science in a way.
Yeah, I mean, I did look at it as like she's using a lot of interesting vocabulary that you would see in the physics of the day and stuff. And she's talking about like electrons at one point and stuff like that. These are all very relatively new things that people were really thinking about. So I like it. Because I do sort of think that, energy, and we've already talked about this, which is basically just motion, does seem to be the thing that underpins everything, right? And I do agree with her when she says, consciousness is a leap of faith in a sense, right? We don't have a good, as we discussed in the previous episode, we don't have a good measure of it. And yeah, I mean, this is the thing. I think I agree with all of her basic tenets, actually, or many of them.
What do you think about every living creature has consciousness and desire?
Okay, so
that was a sentence I highlighted right at the beginning, because one thing that I
think I kind of agree
curious.
With that. I kind of agree. What? I think we sort of agree with that. I think we've mentioned in the past of like there's a spectrum. Yeah.
What I think is interesting is if you read Mises or you read the Bible or you read
what's the difference, right?
What? Yeah. Yeah. No, but tons of philosophies. Even Nietzsche was talking about this too. Separating sort of humans or man, usually how they talk about them, but separating humans from animals in such a way as to say that humans have consciousness and animals don't. And what I appreciate about this statement is it's suggesting that anything living has at least some mode of desiring to continue living.
Yes, I agree with that.
Which is where she's so I feel like she's placing consciousness, like last week we were talking about it being kind of a string of neurons or something like that. And I think she's sort of more on the interpretive side of what consciousness is.
I would say I was
the fight to keep living or something like that.
I would say I was as well, because I was really making more of the point that it's just it's a convoluted network where information's being transferred.
Sure.
Which is abstract, obviously.
But then, like a dandelion, essentially has at least some protoform of consciousness.
Right. Yeah.
Because when the weather changes or something happens, it changes to seeds and then sends those seeds out.
Well, we've already we sort of discussed, this is how I feel, that memory it seems to be a presupposition to consciousness. You need memory in order to have consciousness. And you could say every living being has memory in the sense that they have a genetic code that it's like, so, and which is where, I think a lot of people end up going when they talk about DNA and stuff like that. So yes, I sort of agree with that in that sense.
Right.
It just then becomes what's the frame that is actually what scale is the consciousness occurring on? You know,
Right.
like in our case, the consciousness is occurring on the scale of our entire body as a collection
Right.
of the cells. Maybe that's not necessarily the case for a single cell organism. You know, maybe it's at the.
I mean, I'm not saying that
No,
a dandelion is as complex in terms of consciousness as we are. It's just I appreciate that there is a mention that we are on this journey along with our fellow mice and bears and dandelions.
Yeah. You would. Yeah, well, it certainly makes you not feel alone.
There's a lot of dandelions.
Yeah.
There's so much grass.
Yeah.
People are like, hey, fellas.
Yeah. I feel a kinship to the dandelion. That's why we're, I'm so fragile. Reddit is so tough. You know, I'm just a delicate little dandelion.
Oh, were they mean?
No, they
I didn't
weren't
look.
actually. No, they weren't. But,
Okay.
but man,
I saw one stupid comment again. that
oh,
I
yes.
just
Yeah. On mine.
I don't remember. Could have been.
Yeah, somebody put it's just like, anyway, it doesn't matter. I was thinking we'd talk about it at the end. It's just hilarious how people, they like will respond without anything having to do with the post or like as an adjacent thing. It's the mind of people is amazing. But it's okay because obviously everybody's like, they work up their own story and then they respond. Anyway, it doesn't matter.
Starting to think dandelions are onto a better track.
Yeah, dandelions have, I think, the world sort of figured out.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, so what are we talking about? What is going on here, Antushka?
Okay, all right. So then moving from baseline energy and consciousness, then the second section of the situation, consider the nature of human energy.
Yeah.
And so then she goes on to the idea of harnessing the energy that is created sort of specially and spontaneously within our bodies to achieve more than just living, but actually our wants and our desires. Right? Because she's talking about turning a page in a book or something like that. Mm-hmm. And the energy that takes. And that actually is not about subsistence living. That's about achieving a desire, a very specific desire.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. I don't know. What do you think of that?
I mean, I think that's true. I think the more radical statement is the next one, that the individual energy that you use to turn the page is the only energy operating in the human world.
Yeah.
So that is it.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where she gets to the idea of religion and belief in God and the use of religion and superstition and paganism and all these things about attributing external power outside of yourself. These are kind of fictions or narratives. She doesn't use those words, but those are the ones that come to mind. But actually, all that there is really is just individual energies pursuing their own desires.
Yes.
Whether those desires are to appease fictional gods or to appease themselves.
Right. Yeah, see, I sort of agree with that, although I guess, yeah, I think I see what she's saying in that, like, because, yeah, you're on what, the first part where to think...
yeah, part 2 of the situation.
Yeah, in the human world, there is no entity but the individual person. There is no force but individual energy. In actual human life, the only real society is every living person's contact with everyone he meets.
Right. So this is actually then related to like Mises and Friedman and the idea when they talk about economics. Because a lot of people think of economics as having to do with money. Mm-hmm. But the baseline idea of economics is just the economy is the sum total of exchanges between people.
Yeah. Yeah,
and it doesn't have to be money. It can be any sort of. It can be like us going to and getting a coffee and having a verbal exchange. That's part of the economy.
I imagine they wouldn't have been the first to put that forth, though, because I mean, this is just the.
No, I don't think they're the first to put that forth. I think that idea has been lost a little bit in the way that people think about
Maybe.
an economy and economics and stuff.
Maybe. I mean,
but it has to do
yes.
with interaction.
Right, which is why I think people have a hard time understanding Bitcoin and whatnot. Because it's
Right.
basically just, it's just we're transacting things, as you said, and whether or not we have an abstract currency to serve as the in-between for that is sort of, it's just convenient to do it like that.
Right. The currency is a technology to make it more convenient.
Right.
You're saying.
Yeah. And so I think I get what she's saying, or I think what she's saying is that getting back to this idea that we all have this will to live, which I definitely agree with. I mean, this is like if you study biology, this is one of the first things you learn of what constitutes life. That is actually in the definition, is like a desire to continue living.
Right.
I guess some people's definitions, and I would certainly subscribe to that, among replication and stuff like that. So, and it's true. I mean, because I think this is really what she's getting at is I have this sort of conclusion at the end of the discovery of freedom. Interesting. So making the point that reason for technological development over the past 200 years is due to the man controlling his energy, believing he has control. And so that's the whole discovery of freedom and this is sort of when she goes on in the communism sections talking about not just communism, but sort of how all of these government types have failed because they've been trying to convince people that they are the authority. When in reality, the only authority of humans is, as she says, the religious belief that sort of causes them to stir. And in that sense, I do sort of agree that it was the self-awareness, and this is why I think she's tying it to consciousness, because really what I feel like she's talking about is like humans becoming more conscious in a sense.
Sure.
Because what else is consciousness but this is it, man controlling his energy, believing he has control. So there's an awareness of control that wasn't there before. And so I do think I agree with her on that too, Mr. Antushka.
What do you think about this one? Because I feel like this is another radical statement she makes. Every human being by his nature is free. So she talks about the idea that, I mean, she suggests that you actually cannot truly be enslaved.
Yeah.
And this is something that Ayn Rand writes about too.
Yeah.
The idea that something like your freedom of thought without killing you cannot be stripped. You cannot have that taken from you. You can have somebody chain you up, but there are things like your energy is yours. So you cannot be forced to work, because if somebody's moving your arm to, dig a hole, they're doing the work. Your energy cannot actually be harnessed by somebody else.
Yeah. I think I actually do think I have a little bit of a difficulty with this one, because this is also, I think this is getting at a similar idea that she's making on page 30 in the Planned Economies book, where she's talking about, but a use of force is not control. No living ruler has ever actually controlled his subjects.
Right.
There is no superhuman power in government. Men in government have no natural nor divine superiority to any other man, and no man can control another. No possible use of force can compel any individual to act. A use of force upon him can only hinder, restrict, or stop his acting. But to me...
That's right, I think.
Well, I guess it just...
I think at the base, not that you can't be sort of hijacked by it, not that you can't be coerced, and not that you can't choose to act. I don't remember who we were reading before, but somebody else made a similar point about how you can choose to act in the name of avoiding, maybe was it Michael's, maybe? Something like you can choose to act in the name of avoiding something really bad, like getting beaten or getting tortured. But you are actually at that time making a decision for yourself based on the situation, in the same way that, if there's a mountain lion, you can choose to run, or you can choose to try and scare it away or something like that. Right. You're in a bad situation that has happened to you. And then whatever act you make ultimately is your choice.
Yes, I agree with that up until the last point where somebody kills you.
Oh, sure. If somebody kills you, they have stripped you of your
Yes.
ability to make choices.
Yes.
I think that's right.
So that's, I think, the only sort of, place where I would say that, okay, well, there's this little nuance, but then it sort of gets to that, like, I feel like death.
Doesn't she say that, though? Maybe not.
I don't know if maybe she does at some point, but not in the section I read.
Okay.
But that's sort of a special case, right? Because then you're not living, and thus the idea of control doesn't exist.
Right.
Control and not control doesn't exist in the state of death. Because it seems like control is just explicitly in the state of life, right?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think I do agree with that too. Yeah.
I mean, it's a very challenging point because
This isn't going to be very interesting, though. I'm just agreeing with everything. I think I'll probably disagree as she goes on and starts prescribing stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, and then what about the third point from the situation having to do with the religion and God and the belief in God? Because
yes.
in order for you to act, you must believe that you must have some sense of value.
I think that she is using the term religious in a very broad sense, but I accept her broad sense.
Yeah, I actually have a note from last time I read this. I agree with the principle, but the word God seems unnecessarily loaded. I would not accept that I believe in God just because I have a faithful relationship with value, goodness, and desire.
Right. And I mean, maybe this is what I'm getting at with the control idea. It's like perhaps everything does fundamentally come down to, you can't actually be controlled by anybody, but that doesn't mean that people can't coerce you to do things and those can't be bad, you know what I mean? And stuff like that.
Definitely.
Yeah. And also, I also think here's the other sort of sliver I think she's sort of making is an idea that it's only in consciousness that we discover the control. It's so as we become more self-aware. And so, yes, everybody has consciousness, but it does seem like, and I don't know if she's going to get to this, but it seems like we reached a threshold of consciousness, at least in the West, that allowed us to become more self-aware about our own power, which then caused us to, shirk off the authoritarian ways of, as she puts, the old world. And she's specifically talking about Western Europe in this setting.
Yes.
And I would say really just, the English is where a lot of people got their marching orders in some sense from, or at least seeing how a people can become self-aware and take the power into their own hands. I mean, the bloodless revolution, right, in the end of the 17th century was, I think, the first real big example of that, obviously, aside from Athens and stuff in ancient Greece and Rome. But even those weren't necessarily as self-aware because we didn't see the technological developments that we saw after this infectious, I guess, consciousness took hold.
Right. I liked her point about revolutions that destroy an old power structure and replace it with a new one.
Yeah.
She had the metaphor about a wheel, like, is nothing more than the revolution of a wheel.
Yeah, actually, you're right. She had this great talk, sort of rant also. I'm trying to find it, where she was talking about, the aristocracy. Oh, yeah. They replaced the priest by a king, the king by an oligarch, the oligarchs by a despot, the despot by an aristocrat, the aristocrats by a majority, the majority by a tyrant, the tyrant by oligarchs, the oligarchs by aristocrats, the aristocrats by a king, the king by a parliament, the parliament by a dictator, the dictator by a king, and there's 6,000 years of it in every language.
So what's interesting is I feel like that's related to conversations we've had about history being cyclical, right? And I think what she's saying is that there is a way off of that, potentially. That yes, that is the history is cyclical, but it doesn't have to continue to be that cycle.
Yes. Well, okay, so here now we're finally getting into places where I think I might disagree with her.
Right.
Not necessarily with the cyclical thing, actually. So I actually agree with all that idea. What I disagree with her, though, so she frames this book as the discovery of freedom, right?
Mm-hmm.
And she's also framing the idea that the sort of standard of living has increased tremendously under this newfound system of,
right.
She doesn't call it capitalism, but, I would say capitalism is this idea of empowering the individual as was put out by, the wealth of nations and whatnot.
Right.
Because it's all about self-interest. But I don't, there's still been a lot of exploitation. And there was a lot of exploitation in the 19th century, right? And which is, again, what sort of sparked communism because of, how many people were exploited. So it's the idea that, yes, some people did come into their own consciousness and maybe they are the ones that became the capitalists. But they're still they basically were still using a lot of people and treating a lot of people as chattel who were sleeping machines just to be used for, like serfs before, to be used for their labor.
Right.
And yes, though, her probably point, I imagine, would be, yes, but look at the quality of life of the serf, that what I'm calling the serf, right, the worker, I guess you would say, in the 19th and now 20th and 21st century, compared to the serf in Russia in the 18th century, where they had rags for clothes and they barely had enough to eat. She was making a big point about how starvation was an issue for the lower reaches of humanity forever. And all of a sudden, for some reason, in Western Europe over the last 100 years, it wasn't as big of an issue. Although, she's not counting the Irish, obviously. But I guess, it's... Well,
I would say on the whole, though, not as big an issue.
Yes.
I think maybe she has a more radical point than that, even related to what we were just talking about. That yes, their standard of living has gone up, and that's great. But also, along the lines of nobody can actually be enslaved or controlled if those sort of serf class people realize that they are free, then they will also be able to engage in self-interested behavior much better, which will also increase their own standard of living beyond just the basic, society's better off.
Mm-hmm. Yes, agreed. However, it's also this question of happiness that I don't know if she gets to. And maybe she doesn't care about this question, but I do, And I think it's still...
I'm sure she does. I know Ayn Rand cares very much about happiness. Because Ayn Rand's philosophy, when she sums it up, is that she wants to see a world where everybody is free to pursue whatever makes them happy. And that the history of the world is that almost nobody is free to pursue what makes them happy.
So isn't that what your friend was sort of felt like? Is like everybody should act what they think is right or something like that?
Oh, yeah. That everybody should act according to their own conscience.
Yeah. It's sort of like
it's
that.
hard to argue that they shouldn't.
Well, I don't know, because what if that conscience is telling you to go murder everybody?
I guess the alternative is everybody should act according to my conscience.
Yes. Assuming you have the right
conscience.
Fine.
So that's...
No.
Right. So everybody should act according to their own conscience is a very anarchic statement. And everybody should act according to my conscience is kind of like a totalitarian statement.
But this is where I it's like I agree, but I think it needs the sliver of self-awareness and self-doubt. And this is where...
What does?
That idea that you should act on the will of your own conscience, assuming that conscience is one that is self-critical. And you know what I mean? Because
we're saying conscience, right?
Yes, but it's...
I know we've done this before.
I know we have.
I keep saying conscious. I just want to make sure. We're talking conscience, like the cricket.
Yeah, but they're related, I guess is the point. It's like, consciousness and conscience are related. It's consciousness.
But conscience is like your moral guide.
Yes, but where does this moral guide come from but the thoughts in your head, which are consciousness?
Well, fine. But then, yeah. But I think there's an important distinction if we're talking about one versus the other.
Well, you could think of conscience as like the central node of your consciousness, if you want to, like that stabilizing factor that's always there. And then you have lots of other thoughts, but those aren't the sort of foundational moral framework of you. Right. But this is my point. Anyway, I don't even know what we're talking about anymore.
I mean, I wonder what the world looks like where people should not follow their consciences. Like, I imagine that's the kind of thing that makes people go kind of crazy.
But do you hear what I'm saying, though? It's like, I think it's the world of, you want a well-developed conscious that is going to be self-critical. Because it's as soon as you are the consciousness that thinks that you're always right, I think that's where you end up getting the tyrant again, who wants to enact their will over people. And that's the point. So it's a level, I mean, this is what I keep getting at, is I think it's a threshold of consciousness that we should be aspiring to. But also, I wonder about that because, as we've said before, consciousness breeds anxiety and existential dread. And this will drive people insane if you lean too into it. I actually sort of feel like that's what causes a lot of people to go insane. Not everybody, but...
Being too conscious.
Yes.
Like being too aware or too long a memory.
Yeah, so then the way that we deal with that, the existential dread of knowing that you're going to die one day and being aware of that, is that we will spin narratives, and then if you iterate on those narratives long enough, you can believe them, because that's really, this is how.
But what does this have to do with conscience, like your moral guide?
Well, it's the idea that anything that you repeat in your head is going to become a framework of your mind. So if you're repeating the bad things, then that's going to become a bad framework. And so if conscience...
Bad according to who?
Well, according to others. According to the person...
Like according to you or me or something.
According to me, if you're trying to murder me.
Right. Because if they keep saying it's good to murder you, you're going to be like, no, it's not.
Exactly. So this is the point. But a self-aware individual who's like, okay, well, maybe I shouldn't be listening to this this voice in my head that keeps repeating that I should go kill everybody. Right? It takes self-awareness to realize that, And this is so I'm getting off, but I'm saying that when we didn't talk about this before, but this is how the mind works. The Hebbian learning model is the idea that, neurons that fire together will survive together or whatever. They'll strengthen their connections. And so if you repeat a thought, that's essentially what it is you're strengthening the connections of those thoughts, and you're making that thought more readily present going forward. Which again, what I'm getting at, when we're talking about conscience, this leads back to that, because we already said conscience is a very stable belief system of thoughts.
Right. Because
I'm saying you have gone over those specific beliefs enough to make them stable.
Right. I think maybe I'm wrong. It seems to me that the development of belief is kind of a complicated process, because you can repeat something that you don't believe over and over again, and you're not just going to start believing it.
No, but you're going to have...
There's ways that you might.
Yeah, but this is the thing. Yes, I agree. It's not entirely predictable, other than the fact that something is going to get ingrained in you if you repeat it. You might not know what's going to get ingrained in you, but something will. And that's the point.
Right, but if you say, like, I should steal my neighbor's car, and you believe that that's wrong... I don't think you're going to be able to convince yourself it's right that way.
I don't know. I mean, you if you keep saying it, you might rationalize a way that it is right.
Well, I think if you rationalize why, but I think if you just say, I should steal my neighbor's car, I don't think you're going to get to the point where you believe that you should just by saying that.
Again, I'm not saying that exact expression is going to be the thing that gets ingrained in you. But something associated with that will get ingrained with you. That's the point.
Sure.
That's the point. So you are what you eat is the point, I suppose. And okay, so I don't even know why I'm making this point anyway. So we were talking about conscience. How did we get off on this? Because we're talking about people feeling like they should act on their conscience. This is my point, is that, and again, you want a self-aware person to be doing this, and a self-aware person understands that they are what they eat and can then program themselves to the best of their ability with their belief system.
But the trick is, if you shouldn't act on your conscience, if you should only act on your conscience if it is in accordance with other people's consciences, then you will basically never act.
I agree. Well, I don't know if I agree. Let me think about that.
Because some people think you should do something and some people think you shouldn't do something all the time.
No, but this gets at the idea that you start as a autonomous person that's not taking anybody's feedback into account. But then through our societal induction, you then start to take other people's, and then you're going to gravitate to other people, and you're going to repeat other people's actions that you think that you should, and you're going to read other people's words that you think that you should, and all of these are carving
right, your moral
a
framework will shift over your life.
Yes.
That's true.
Yes. So and again, I just think self-awareness is the way to do it so this is, I guess this is the point, is it's not saying that you should necessarily tailor your beliefs to what everybody says, but you should have a self-awareness to think about how your actions impact others and think about the people that you want, those actions to impact positively. And I think that's what we all implicitly do.
So should people who've considered it deeply act on their conscience?
Should people that considered it deeply act on their conscience? Well, so I think maybe...
What if they've considered it a lot?
Yeah.
But it just disagrees with what you think is right.
So you started this off by saying that nobody acts on their conscience? Or what did you... Because I actually might have just worked my way into agreeing with you.
Well, I don't know. I don't think that nobody acts on their conscience. I think that you don't want a world where people are not acting on their conscience.
Yes. And my point is, I think I agree with you. I think I agree with the idea that everybody is following their conscience.
I don't think everybody's following their conscience.
I'm adding the sliver that I think you want people to do it with a self-aware conscience, I guess is the idea. You want to have a self-critical conscience. And as soon as you start to think that you know right over everybody else, I think you're going to fall into sort of the trap that everybody else does, all the other despots, which is where I honestly start to like. That's why I sort of disagree with Ayn Rand about a lot of things, because her whole her Atlas Shrugged. It's like every one of the people she talks about in that is just obviously they're very self-assured, but it's like self-assuredness to a ridiculous degree, But she wouldn't like me, so, what do I know?
I mean, I agree that doubt is important in the name of self-improvement, but I think doubt is important for selfish reasons. I know Ayn Rand is very against doubt, but I completely disagree with her on that point.
Yeah, there was this ridiculous part in Atlas Shrugged at the end where they're they're going to whatever, one of the... I don't know. It's been a while since I read it, but there's a guard, and the guard's just this automaton that has no will, and then there's just shoot him. Right. It was just a ridiculous part, I remember. And it's no wonder that movie was never good. Nobody's ever been able to make a good movie out of it, because the book is kind of ridiculous. It's just Anyway, I did, it was fun to read as a 16-year-old, though. Right. Very spicy, too.
Yeah.
Okay. Man, you got me ranting again.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think all I'm saying, I thought that you had sort of opened it by saying that, people nobody ever doesn't act on their conscience, which I think is kind of what she's saying. And maybe conscience isn't, maybe we shouldn't use this word. Nobody ever isn't acting with their own will. But then that gets, but that actually will, I think, has
but their
consciousness.
will, according to her, stems from whatever their religious belief is.
Right.
Whatever their system of value is.
Which requires consciousness.
Maybe that's true because you can have a tiered value system.
Right.
You can say, I don't think you should lie. Mm-hmm. But then you can also have a value system where like there's Nazis at the door and you're hiding Jews in your basement or something like that. And then a higher order value takes precedence. And so in this case, maybe now you think you should lie or something like that.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree. And it's, I mean, you know, all I'm saying with the self-doubt thing is because that's the only way that you can make sure that you don't become the tyrant that, you know, but again, maybe you want to be a tyrant. So, you know.
But sometimes it's not the time to doubt. If you need to act and there's a mountain lion right there, that's not a good time to doubt.
Yes. Well,
you got to make a decision.
Yes.
And it might be the wrong one.
Oh, for sure. For sure.
And there might not be a good decision to make in that case, but you have to act.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And that's an immediate thing where I would say you're acting more on impulse than consciousness.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Sure. Or the Nazis at the door, a different situation where there is a moral quandary in question, but you can't say, "Excuse me, fellas, let me think about this for about 20 minutes before I answer you."
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Again, I think in that sense, you're acting, yes, I agree, on whatever sort of that implicit conscience that you have programmed in your head.
Right. But I think you should also.
Yeah. Well, maybe this is maybe should is the where I'm having an issue with it.
Sure.
Because maybe I'm saying it's not really you don't really have a choice. You're going to do it whether or not you want to. So maybe I agree with, I don't know who I agree with here. Who's making that point?
I don't know. Determinists?
What's that?
Determinists?
Yeah.
Sam Harris?
Well, it's funny because I feel like I do always come back to determinism.
Yeah, I think you do.
But, you know, this is where consciousness has an interesting effect on determinism because it feels like you are moving with a force, which is why I do think about consciousness and sort of body computations as two separate things. You have a bunch of neurologic computations that are always running that we're not aware of, but then we also have the neurologic computation of consciousness, right? Which is just, in my opinion, as I already said, just a very convoluted loop of those things.
Right.
And that's why I keep getting back to this idea of threshold. It's like there seems to be a threshold of consciousness that's required for you to be self-aware enough for you to feel like you have the will to do something. Whereas, as she says in the old world, you know, she keeps talking about the old world, and which is basically just, it seems like the world before the 18th century, or maybe even 19th century. These were a bunch of, as I've called them, sleeping machines that were maybe ruled by a few very conscious individuals. But, you know, for the most part, the general population was not conscious. Or as a very low level of consciousness, I should say.
Right.
Below the threshold of feeling like they have the power to do something.
Right. I mean, that's kind of related to her baby bit in the babies are all babies are pagans. Right. Yeah. I mean, that's a funny statement.
Yeah, it is funny. Yeah. Your baby's definitely a pagan.
I did ask her that earlier.
Yeah, you put like a headdress on or something. I don't know, like an old Scandinavian. I don't know. I'm saying Scandinavian because, you know, I don't know.
Right.
You gotta be careful.
Yeah. I'm looking for a section. There was a bit that I thought was good. Maybe it was in the, I don't know if it was in the communism section or not.
But yeah, I think just to put a pin in that, I think that is maybe where I was getting myself confused is this idea of should versus you just probably are going to. However, because we just are going to act on our conscience whether or not we want to, consciousness the idea of reflecting on the conscious is the way that we can sort of moderate it
Right.
from becoming too extreme in whatever direction.
Right. So what do you think about her point about the external authorities?
Yeah, that they don't actually have
Well,
control.
because it also
or
addresses
power.
things we've talked about in the past about do groups have volition? Do groups have desires? Things like that. Because I think the point that she's making was absolutely not, of course. The way their groups are the sum total of individual interactions, and then religious beliefs are what guide large groups of people to all make the same action.
But this is why I keep having
Because they
Yes.
offload
Yes.
their will onto some kind of external non-human authority.
Yeah. It could just be the scale again. I don't know if we should debate this again. The system of down argument.
Right. Yes, the classic system of a down argument. It's like the Chewbacca defense.
Yeah. Yeah. When did we talk about that? That was an early episode. That was like
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, I think that was when we were doing Thaddeus Russell's book, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Which was in the 3-point something, right?
Right.
Maybe 3.2.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Here, but the communist is looking for the authority that controls men, and taking it for granted that man does not control himself. Then the authority that controls him must be his situation, the sum totals of trees and rabbits and weather, and so on.
That sounds like
The
the opposite of what you're saying. That sounds like she disagrees with you. Read that again.
That the communist is saying that man
Oh,
doesn't
the
control
communist.
himself.
Sorry, I missed that.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
That puts a lot of that changes the. Sorry.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. So, exactly. Yeah. Okay. So as far as I know, only the American Indians called this intangible authority the Great Spirit. Savages called it taboo. Spartans called it Sparta. My Dungang friends call it the law of Lek. Many groups of communists living in the States call it God. Marx called it the will of the masses. I highlighted that because I've been hearing that term a lot lately.
The will of the people.
Will of the people, that
Yeah.
kind of a thing. That's one of those funny things where it's like, whenever anybody says that, it's like, how in the world are you determining that?
Yeah. Yeah.
The proletarian state, communists in this country now call it their authority, the party line, and it lives in Moscow. In theory, communism is the total self-surrender of the individual to the will of this intangible authority, which, of course, is always, quote, the good. The theory and practice of communism are as old as history. They persist because the theory is partly based on fact. It recognizes the equality and brotherhood of man. In practice, no effort to make this theory work has ever permitted human energy to work effectively because the theory does not recognize that individuals control their own energy.
Yeah. So the reason I keep going back to scale, though,
Right.
is because it's like, imagine a cell within your body. Let's say, for all we know, there's like the cells are communicating in a way we just don't know, and maybe every cell is conscious, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then the collection of that creates the will that is us.
Uh-huh.
So that's my point, is like, for all we know, it's just the collection of our will is
creating a new will.
is creating a new conscious that's on a scale that we just aren't able to perceive because we're in a different, we're at this scale.
If that's true, then we have nothing to say. If we can't perceive it, then we have nothing to say about it.
Well, what? What do you... Okay, well, let's just forget about the electron.
Well, no, because we have a way of perceiving an electron because we've designed models to think about it.
But before we had a way of perceiving it, we had models. I mean, it was theorized before it was discovered.
Right.
So, I agree. It's we're always going to be able to say like, oh, you don't know what you're talking about until an experiment's done that proves this. Sure, but
well, I guess what would be the experiment that could prove that the will of the people exists?
What, I mean, you want me to just come up with something right now on the spot? Okay, let me just. Okay.
Or if we go back to the what was it, the chemistry book or the medical book? We need to come up with an experiment, and then whoever's better at interpreting data.
No, I mean, it's a very difficult question though, because
what are we even talking about? What are we testing?
Well, and
at least with an electron,
right,
there's a sense for something physical that you're talking about.
It does seem like we are able to. We know more about the small world than the large world, if that makes sense. We know a lot. I'm not saying we don't obviously know a lot about, astrophysics and stuff like that. But in terms of what exactly this strange galaxy, which honestly, when you do look at it, it kind of looks like a crazy, spider web, right? As people have shown. I think that we are much worse at conceptualizing up than down, I guess, is my point.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it could be like a Horton Hears the Who. We could be on a dust speck living in somebody's body and all that. Yeah,
exactly.
Maybe.
Thank you for bringing that up.
What?
Dr. Seuss.
Yeah, and maybe a little elephant will hear us.
Right. Maybe. Yeah. So anyway, I mean, yeah. But, I do think she makes an intriguing point about organizations at the end of the Planned Economies chapter, which is sort of getting at this idea and again, sort of focusing on the things I agree with her on for whatever reason. She basically says at the end on page 54, this tendency to waste energy is in all organizations of human beings. It develops in all business organizations. The larger the business, the greater the tendency to waste human energy. But an organization not maintained by police force, but dependent for its existence upon the multitudes of individuals whom it serves, encounters a natural check to this waste. So I think that's a very intriguing point, because she's accepting the idea that organization is a necessity, but she adds this, I think, very good sliver saying that all organizations, as she's already said, is going to waste human energy. However, there will be a natural waste that's reached if you don't have the monopoly of force, essentially. Now, we could debate that, but I at least like that even though she's an anarchist, I feel like she has... I don't know. I just felt like that addressed my issue that a lot of the other anarchists were making about organization, because none of them, I guess, maybe dealt with organization as head on as she is. Maybe that was my issue, right? I mean, obviously they did, but in terms of like saying like it is inevitable that we're going to form organizations, and that also that we actually want to form organizations. You know, that's the other thing. Like, we want to.
I mean, Rothbard writes about that a lot. I don't know. Well, I don't think he wrote about it in the Anatomy of the State, because the Anatomy of the State is more of a breakdown of what's happening.
And again,
but he writes about,
of course,
community cooperation is the only way to have an anarchist society.
And I'm only obviously reflecting on the stuff we read. So, not saying that nobody has, addressed this well. I'm just saying, I like the way that she addressed it. That's all I'm saying.
Mm-hmm.
That's all I'm saying, Antushka.
Yeah. Well, can you read it again? That was an interesting...
So, well, because this is all on the back of basically how... I already start... Yeah, I'll just read it again. What am I doing? So the tendency to waste energy is in all organizations of human beings. It develops in all business organizations. The larger the business, the greater the tendency to waste human energy. But an organization not maintained by police force, but dependent for its existence upon the multitudes of individuals whom it serves, encounters a natural check to this waste. If its costs in human energy are too high, its customers desert it. Businessmen call this check the law of diminishing returns. So
this sounds to me like an argument for free market and against police.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, because...
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, because
maybe I was misunderstanding what you were saying.
Yeah, because I mean, and she works up to this with that sort of point I was saying, like use of force is not equal to control. I think that's sort of where where she's leading with all of this, and only individuals who act against the majority opinion in their time will try to make a change. If they are not stopped, they destroy the existing majority-approved government monopoly. Anyway, so that was just a, but yeah, and this.
Yeah, I mean, basically, that sounds like a free market argument.
Right.
That's like Milton Friedman.
Oh, yeah. I mean, this is exactly the sort of stuff I feel like you were saying on 32. And when men in government have a monopoly, they have the use of force backed by majority opinion to prevent anyone from attacking their monopoly, right? And a planned economy, therefore, is a use of force to prevent the natural use of human energy. And she's sort of making the point that all previous types of government were planned economies.
Right.
Or all previous, I guess, economies were planned economies. Yeah. Since history began, all the people of the old world have always lived in what is now called a planned economy. When anyone says a planned economy, he means a control of the human energy used in producing and distributing material goods by an authority consisting of a few men and according to a plan made by those men and enforced by the police. So yes. Right. So yes, I would say the police is a very important point in this because it's obviously the monopoly of force that the government has.
Right.
And she sort of also makes this point about how all bans, like all police bans, kind of start off with a good purpose. And, she's using her own experience in the frontier as like everybody, as I think you've said, was an anarchist in a sense that lived in the frontier. I think she explicitly says that. And everybody had a gun because you had to protect yourself. But as people aggregated, they started to form groups to try to get rid of the, quote, bad men, as she says.
Right.
But these ultimately then themselves descend into tyranny. And where does she have that? She has a good point about that I had underlined, but I can't find it quickly. So who cares?
That sounds a little bit like the iron law of oligarchy.
Yeah, and I think this is why I like a lot of what she's saying, because I do feel like, I mean, maybe she probably, was familiar with Pareto and everybody like that, and Mikel. Yeah, I think that's why I like it, because she sort of is accepting the inevitability of some of these systems.
Right.
Whereas I felt like when we were reading like Spooner and stuff, it just felt a little bit more like as I said, like sort of childish, whereas I don't know. I just feel like she's addressing it a little bit more realistically.
Right. Well, I think that to come to Spooner's defense a little bit, I think he was addressing something more specific. I don't know. I don't see it as particularly childish to say that the U.S. Constitution is not valid. I'm sure she would say the same thing.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, she would.
I feel like what she's doing is she's addressing it from the ground up rather than attacking a specific thing she doesn't like.
Yes. And I think that's a better way to do it.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, that's really what it is. Because, I mean, if you go back and, I mean, you don't have to listen, but if others listen, I do think that at the end of all the Anarchy episodes, I would be like, but I kind of agree with all of this. It's like, even though I come out harsh, it's like, I get a lot of the points, but I just felt like they weren't going about it the right way. And I think that's maybe what I find compelling about it. But again, I bet you that we're gonna go on and read like what she thinks that we should be doing, and I'll probably disagree. But
I hate this.
Yeah.
Screw you,
but
lady.
So far it's at least been a fun to read, I would say.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty easy read.
Yes,
which is nice. I like when people write easily.
Yes,
it drives me a little bit. I hated Spooner's writing.
Yeah,
we talked about that. It was just like,
well, in Burnham,
so annoying.
Is Burnham's kind of the same way?
Not as bad as Spooner, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, Foucault obviously. He's in his own league.
It's like, it's annoying.
Yeah.
But he's also writing in a different language.
It would have been the same, though. Even if we read it in French.
Yeah. Speaking French, man.
Yeah, I mean, even Nietzsche. I mean, he was a little bit maybe. I mean, he was fun to read, and he had an interesting style. But certainly, yeah. And I fall into this issue too. I mean, I'm sure. I mean, it was funny. Like getting back to the Reddit thing, it's like I do feel like you are better at sort of encapsulating ideas that people want to respond to. Because when I look back at mine, I just like class 1 residues. It's like probably once somebody reads class 1 residue, they're already turned off. But anyway.
Yeah, well, because I feel like I like post some stupid question that's like something vague,
Yeah.
and people are like, no, that's not true. It doesn't lead to democracy.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And honestly,
just ask a stupid question.
Yeah, that's a good point. This is the key to Reddit. Just get people pissed off.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like, is your mom an idiot? No, she's not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, well, yeah, that's cool. So,
all right. So should we keep going? Because I actually think the war section is interesting.
Yeah.
Or should we hop to part 2 with the revolution attempts?
So I'm gonna probably try to read the war section because it's not that long. No. But I think we should move on. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think the bummer is that actually. This the way it's set out, it would be good to get through kind of all of it. It's just I don't think I can.
Yeah. So that's what I'm saying is let's set it as definitely read something from part 2, and then if you have time, read the war section.
Yeah, I think maybe if we do the first 2, that's like about 50 pages.
Yeah.
The first and second attempt, and then maybe next time we'll skip to the third attempt because that's kind of the more interesting.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Cool.
Yep. All right. Yeah. So Reddit. Did you want to talk about Reddit?
Oh. I think
Let me see. Is there anything fun there? Is there anything new that I haven't seen?
One person was saying something about like, the world's still run by white conservative men, so
hell yeah,
obviously, like it's. I don't know. They didn't say obviously. This is where I was like, what are you responding to in my post? Because here, I'll say what I said. Yeah, this is gonna just become. We'll just have a podcast about responding to Reddit.
I love it.
But yeah. Yeah. I got invited to a political discussion.
Oh, nice.
Subreddit. Did you get invited to that?
No, I didn't.
No, I'm just kidding. Sorry. Yeah.
Here we go. Conservative white male billionaire still running the world last time I looked.
Yeah. So I said, is the current Western ruling class full of Pareto's class 1 residues? And if so, is this a main driver of the current instability?
This is a long question.
I know. Oh, it's multiple questions. Has the elite atrophied? That's what we discussed on the episode. Hope you like it.
Oh, man. I read that and I just glaze over.
I'm trying to make people think, Aunt Dushka, but yes, it's a bit much. I agree. But yeah, and then I won't.
I'm trying to think how to condense it.
Yeah,
is the current is the Pareto's class 1 residues? If so, is this,
what did you?
I feel like the thing is, if it sounds like an essay question on a college exam, it's probably not a good title for.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I have a hard time.
Has the elite atrophy?
Yeah, I should have just had that be the question.
Even that, though, I feel like it's
too pretentious. It's not
going to invite anybody to say anything.
Well, I think that's what they were responding to. Or that's what I was going to say. It's conservative white male billionaire still ruling the world.
Ruling class, is there a way to express the 2080? Like, does 20% rule 80% or something?
But we don't really get into the... So the Pareto principle, or that actually, I didn't realize, but that he didn't actually come up with that. That was come up with based off of his writing, but somebody actually,
the distribution.
Yeah, made that. Well, okay, I shouldn't say. I was reading something very briefly that gave me that impression, but I'm not 100% on that.
Right.
But also, it was interesting. Pareto was a mechanical engineer of some kind, or he was a civil engineer. So he had a very sort of. Now that I know that, I can kind of see a lot of that in his writing. He was very mathematical. So maybe he did come up with a distribution, and I didn't realize it. Doesn't matter. But yes, I agree. Atrophy. I feel like the word. Maybe that's the word that just people are. Do you think it scares people?
Well, like the elite atrophied. If I read that, I wouldn't even know what you were talking about.
Yeah, I'm pretentious. This is why you have. This is why you're so important, Antushka. You have to drag me down.
Man, that Pareto, that episode last week bummed me out so much. I was like sad all night.
Why?
Something about his theory or his. Maybe it was how Burnham was writing about it. It just felt so bleak.
Interesting.
Like we're just caught. There's nothing we can do to make anything better. We're caught in this shitty cycle.
Interesting. Well, so
I guess at least where I see all these some more anarchist writings as very hopeful from my perspective, because there's people who are saying that it's been really hard, and the history of humanity is a lot of suffering. Mm-hmm. And it's gotten better, and here's how we can maybe make it even better.
Right.
And it's not this is going to be perfect or paradise or heaven. It's about getting better than it's been. And I love that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, it's interesting that you got so depressed by that. I could see that. I wonder also if it's just the state of the world was. I mean, it's still kind of crazy though. But
oh, really? I thought it was all.
No,
fun.
everything's cool. Yeah,
I thought everything kind of got cleaned up this week.
Yeah. See, the thing is, though, I think the reason I'm not depressed about it is because it's like this is the great thing about consciousness, and this is why I keep going back to the self-awareness thing. And sorry, I know we talk about consciousness too much. Which is a consciousness.
I think we should have like a consciousness jar.
Yeah,
that we have to put
every
money
time
in.
we drink or something. Okay, or we put money in it. Yeah.
Oh man, we would be
drunk. So drunk. Yeah, that's good. But it's the idea that once you tell somebody that they are doing something or that they can't do something, we humans have this weird tendency to be like, oh, yeah, you think that? Mm-hmm. Well, I'm going to go do the opposite now. And so that's why I think there's actually a lot of power in calling out these patterns. You know?
Sure.
And that's why I'm not depressed about it. Because it's like, I actually think if everybody understands the patterns, then we actually will break out of the patterns. It will probably make new patterns.
I guess I was reading it in suggesting that it really isn't even possible to.
See,
it was similar because I listened to, what's his name? Scott Adams on Michael Malice. And I get a similar thing. He was talking about something similar too, that people both don't and can't engage rationally with the world.
Is that the Dilbert guy?
Yeah.
Okay. Is this
but he's
before
weird.
Or
he's a
after
hypnotist. He was like a huge Trump supporter.
Yeah.
He's just a weird dude.
Is this before or after he lost the cartoon?
I don't know.
Yeah. I'm just wondering. Yeah.
But yes, the Dilbert.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So sorry. So what was he saying again?
I was just talking about people not behaving rationally, and what he said that the world changes once you realize that nobody either is or can behave rationally.
Yes, but this is where I take a more hopeful stance, and that I keep sort of getting back. And this is why I'm talking about consciousness so much. Honestly,
right?
Is because it's like that is the way to break out of these cycles, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Maybe.
Because as soon as you're aware of it, we have this weird tendency as humans to be like, oh, yeah, you think I'm going to fall into a cycle like that? And we go over and we fall into another cycle.
You fall into another one.
But it's a different one.
Yeah, right.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know, man.
All right.
Yeah, cool. I don't know what to call this episode. Discover.
There was a funny thing you said right at the beginning. I can't remember.
Okay. I'll listen for it. Cool.
All right.
Sweet. Yeah.
See you.
That's all I got.
Bye.